Hey y'all, so today I'm going to bring you an art journal tutorial. It is inspired by Maremi Smallart. She does lots of really awesome YouTube videos, and she has a Facebook group. And in there she does what she calls 52 cafe journals. And so the prompt for this one had various requirements. One was shades of gray and greens and circles. So I basically watched her video and looked at some other entries or pictures that other people had posted, and then I decided I would try and make my own. Art journals aren't really my forte. I enjoy them, but it's just not what I've done the most of. So I thought this would be a really fun video because it's stretching for me, and we should always, keep trying new things and don't be afraid to maybe not be great at it at first, but just have fun in the process. So what I've done here is I've taken some lightweight cardstock and just ripped it into various pieces and used a craft glue stick to glue those pieces down. Unfortunately, my video for some reason decided it wanted to get really blurry right in the middle of gluing these down, and it's hard to see the white on white, but once I start adding the color, then you'll notice the difference. One of the things that I really love about mixed media and art journaling is that I've painted my whole life. And for some reason, when it comes to painting, I have this idea in my head that it has to look perfect like a photograph. But with mixed media or art journaling, it's just about the process. And so I find so much peace and so much healing, and I'm able to process through whatever's happening in my life through art, which has actually given me this really great passion for sharing my art, which is why I'm making these tutorials. So after I glued all those pieces down, I went ahead and took some Liquitex clear gesso and went over the top of the page. I did this because I knew I wanted to use a water-based medium on it, so I wanted to use water-soluble oil pastels over top of the paper to kind of color the edges and stuff. And you can do that on the regular mixed media paper, but it doesn't take real well. So when you cover it with gesso, it just helps it take the paint better. So I put a relatively thin layer of clear gesso on there, and I have this paintbrush that's dedicated just to sticky stuff or gessos. So right there I'm showing you that I'm using water-soluble oil pastels by Crayola. They are comparable from what I've read in reviews to the Prima ones, but they are much, much cheaper. They are relatively new to me. I probably got them about a month ago, so I'm just playing around and myself and learning how to use these. But I have found that they have a great set of colors available, and I just really like them. They're fun to play with. They're fun to work with because they're water soluble and you can spread them around. So what I decided to do was just to go around all of the edges of the paper that I had glued down. That way it'll give it some depth and some color, and you can actually see on the white on white that there's different textures there because I have the layers of paper over the top. So I am not very well versed at doing paper layering of this sort. Typically what I do is I make mixed media cards and pretty little floral things. I don't necessarily do a lot of dimensional work that's like low dimension and not a lot of different layers. So I think the best thing to do inside of this is to just play. Um, I have only been doing mixed media for about 3 years now, and 90% of what I've learned has come either from just trying or from watching videos and then trying. And I've learned by watching people like Marta or like Tiffany Solorio or Emilia, and I watch them and kind of use some of their techniques, come up with some of my own, because we're all different. We don't all have to have the same methods that we use. We don't all have to have the same style. I think life would be pretty boring if all the art looked the same and if all the people talked the same and thought the same. I think it's beautiful that we all get to have our own unique kind of style and design to the way that we do things, the way that we think and process and make beautiful art. So I would love to just encourage you, if you're afraid of making a video or if you're afraid of making art, just try it. It doesn't have to look like anybody but you, because you're a unique creation and you should just be who you are. And the world is missing a whole beautiful thing if you're not being yourself. So I'm going to continue to just go around the edges with some of the black here, and then what I'll do is I'll water down the black and just kind of do an overlay of the color all over the page, aside from on top of the paper that I glued down. I just did that to try and give just some extra color to the background to let the white paper pop out. From here, I'm just going to go silent for a little bit and let you guys enjoy watching the video until I come back with some more color. Okay, so here I've chosen to use cool gray. I picked it because we were supposed to use shades of gray, and it looks like it also has a green tint to it. I also choose forest green and then just a regular plain green. I don't really know exactly how much to rub on my background there, but I just decided that I would rub a little bit, add some water, and see how far it goes. And if I need more, then I just add more and more water. I ended up using mostly green. The forest green was really light and really pretty, but it didn't add enough color with all the gray that I had already in the background. So basically it's like a lower layer and then I add green on top of it. I finish it off with the gray, and you'll see that as it comes. I haven't really gotten that far in the video yet, but I find that layering color really helps. So if you laid down a color and you're like, ah, this doesn't look like I want, don't be afraid to just add more color. Just keep going. The layers will eventually add up, and at some point you'll say, did I need to layer all that stuff? And it doesn't matter because you have a finished product that's beautiful. All the little layers just add up to extra beauty. So if you're wondering what my craft mat is, it is actually Teflon sheets that are typically used in the kitchen and made for baking. They're super cheap. And sometimes I just have to figure out ways to cut corners. So I use these as my craft mat. They work really, really well. And I got a 3-pack of, I think they're like 16 by 16 inch squares for, I don't know, under $10. So they work really, really well because even with my gesso or my modeling paste, if I leave it on there and it dries, it just peels right off. Any kind of glue, gel mediums, they just peel right off. The paint, I can leave it there and let it dry, any kind of paint, and it just rubs right off when I go back to clean it. I like that because I'm not necessarily really good about cleaning right when I'm done with my art projects because I have so many things to do. And typically I do my art while everybody's still awake. I don't wait for everybody to go to sleep to do it. So, that means I have to stop in the middle of things and make dinner or whatnot. And so cleaning comes later. I am going to link everything that I use for the most part in the description of this video. I will give you a heads up that I am an affiliate marketer, which means I get a small amount of money if you click the link and buy it. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does give me a small source of income to help pay for making the videos and buying materials. So another one of the materials needed for this art journal, or suggested for this art journal prompt, was colored pencils. Originally I had no idea how I would use them, but I just decided to make these circles with it. I purposely did not make the circles perfect and all just one, line. I like them when they're a little bit messy. In the end, I think I probably could have added a few more circles than I have here, but this is how many I ended up putting up. I didn't know how many originally to put on because I knew I was going to add a stack of butterflies and some words and some stenciling later on, which you'll see. So I end up pulling out my gelatos made by Faber-Castell. Sometimes they call them gel sticks. This is just a generic pack that I actually bought while I was in Germany a couple of years ago. You can get them on Amazon relatively cheap. I use the white and the black and the darker green that came in my standard package. I like the gelatos because they cover really thick. So I knew that they would actually go over that paper and make a solid circle rather than kind of a see-through circle. And I can smudge them longer and work with them longer than I can with acrylic paint. White acrylic paint would work with this. You just have to work faster because it'll dry faster. I did find that the gelato didn't smudge as well as it normally does. I'm not sure if that's because it was on top of those oil pastels that are water soluble, but they probably still have a bit of that oil paint kind of texture and stickiness to them. So I think that's probably why they didn't go down as smooth. I will have to remember that for next time and maybe just see if there's a difference between using the gelatos with the oil pastels or not. One thing that you'll notice when I'm laying down the gelatos is I do try and keep the green and the blacks all to one side of the circle, the same side of the circle in all the circles. I just did that to keep perspective. So that just kind of in art shows that there's a light source coming from one side. It's not really necessary all the time in art journaling. I just, for some reason, really felt like keeping all of them in the same perspective for this. So I did that with the green. I put all the green in, and then I'll go back around with some black gelato and make smudges on the outside of the circles. I do that to kind of give it depth to the circles so that they're not just like round things sitting on top of, the paper pieces. I wanted to try and make it look like there was more dimension to them. Unfortunately, with the black, you'll see one piece of the black kind of made a little bit of a mess, and I had to go back over with extra green and extra white. Not really a big problem, though. I just added extra paint and kept on going. decide to do some stamping. And it's not your normal style stamping. I use a Tim Holtz stencil. I'm not sure what it is called, but it's got lots of little dots that go from bigger to smaller. I really like it. I use it in a lot of my projects because it just adds another layer of texture. It looks really good just in the background as background texture. So I'm just using a foam stamp pad thing. I don't know why I don't know what it's called, but I'm using one of those with black pigment ink through the stencil. I don't really have a specific plan of where I want to put it. Typically, I try and go diagonal across the page, get some in the center, get some corners and some sides, and just kind of add the stencil design through, you know, whatever looks good to my eye. I'm not real specific. I don't know the science or the specific art behind it. I just know it looks good, so that's what I do. And then I take this beautiful stencil that I actually made. I designed and cut this myself with my laser cutter. I have a professional grade laser cutter, and I used really good 15 millimeter plastic sheets to make this stencil. And then I just used some modeling paste and a Prima silicone brush. I do hold the silicone brush a little strange because the head has actually fallen off. So it's stuck back in there and it kind of works. I just kind of have to hold it to the handle to make sure it doesn't slide out while I'm doing the stenciling. Again, I don't have a very specific plan of stenciling the modeling paste on here. I just put it where I think it'll look good, add it to kind of the edges of the circles and the edges of the paper in random places. At the end of this, you'll see that I cut the video out to go clean my stencil and my brush. I have found that it is really, really important to clean your stencils and your brushes. If not, they get ruined really easily. And honestly, while I know I can recut this stencil, I just don't want to if I don't have to. So I cut off the video and went ahead and cleaned my stencil, put my kids to bed, and then came back to making this video. Okay, so another one of the materials in the journaling prompt was either a triple butterfly or 3 butterflies. I took these 3 butterflies that I had in my stash. I've probably had these for 3 years. They're kind of bigger and bulkier and just kind of not a color scheme that I would typically use. But I thought they would go really well with this journal, so it worked out perfect. I just layered the 3 different size butterflies together using hot glue. I used hot glue because it's a bit thicker, so it just was easy to make the dimension so that the butterflies kind of looked like they were standing up a little bit off of each other. So I glue them down with that hot glue. After I do that, I have spray bottles of watered down acrylic paint. When I first started doing mixed media, I really couldn't afford most of the supplies, so I watered down all sorts of colors of cheap acrylic paint that you can get for 50 cents a bottle at Walmart. It has worked really, really well for a long time. I still use them for splatters on all of my projects instead of buying some of the better stuff because they still work really well. And I like it. I I don't have any problems with them. They dry well. They might take a little bit longer to dry than maybe some of the other stuff, but that doesn't really bother me. I actually didn't wait for the modeling paste to dry on this either, so you'll see throughout some of the rest of this process that I try not to touch the page with parts of my hand or my arm as much as possible because I don't want to get the wet paint on me. So what I did was I just splattered, I just shook the white onto the paper, and then with the black I take the spray nozzle out and I use my pen and tap it against it to get smaller splatters. That gives me a little more control and it gives me smaller splatters. Whereas with the white, I didn't really care where it went. I just wanted big white splatters everywhere. The black seems to stand out and take over sometimes if you do too many big splatters, so I wanted to try and keep it to little splatters. From here, I decide to put my butterfly on the page. I used hot glue to do that, and then you'll see in just a minute after I get it pressed down nice and hard and well stuck on there that I don't like it because I feel like there's just not enough texture on my page. So art journaling is different for me because there's not typically a whole lot of texture and layering. But what I did try to do is add a little bit of texture by using cheesecloth. Some people use embroidery thread for this or upholstery thread. I find that when I try and loop it, it just, I don't, maybe it's just me, but it doesn't ever look good. So I just stick to cheesecloth. You could color the cheesecloth to make it look like it stands out more or makes the butterflies stand out more, but I didn't mind just leaving it white and leaving the whole thing just kind of softer with the butterflies on top of the cheesecloth. It gave just enough texture that I liked it. So I just tack it down in the same spot that I had the butterfly with the hot glue, and then I go ahead and hot glue that butterfly right back on where I had it. It's not really a big deal that the glue got ripped off because it kind of heats itself up and remelts when it has the other hot glue right back on top of it. I also decided to tack down a couple of corners of the cheesecloth just because after this dries and I close my book and I open it and I close it and I open it and I turn pages, sometimes that cheesecloth will move around and get kind of scrunched up, and I wanted it to stay in those certain spots. So I press the butterflies down real hard and then just lift up the edges so that it looks more dimensional. From this point, I grab my pen, which is just a really fine tip gel-like pen. I got it in a pack of 2 at the dollar store. They're super cheap, but they work really well. So I really like these for just doing borders around my pages. I just kind of intentionally scribble them so that they're not perfectly straight and they look like they overlap. They don't go over the gelato real well, which is fine. It's not really a big deal because there's only a couple of spots where there's really gelato in the way, which is that one half circle right there. And I just scribble spots down the page just to kind of, I don't know, I like it. It just gives one extra little bit of something to look at. I don't really have a whole big explanation for it. And so, yeah, I continue to do that with the pen all the way around the page. I do all the way around the page because I have had pages that I've actually pulled out of this book and framed. Sometimes I just really like the way they look, and I don't like to have my art just kind of hiding in books or in boxes or in baskets. I like to have it displayed, so my house is full of different art pieces that are hanging in frames and on canvases and all over my house. After that, I go ahead and search through my stash of words. I have a huge stash of words from different companies and for myself. I've just printed out tons of words. And I use Fabrifix. When I went to Hobby Lobby to get Fabri-Tac, they didn't have any. I prefer Fabri-Tac, but like I said, they didn't have any and I needed glue because I was out, so I got Fabrifix. I will say the difference that I found between Fabrifix and Fabri-Tac is that Fabrifix, it tacks really well, but it is stringy like hot glue, which is kind of annoying because then you end up having to like pull the stringy pieces away, where Fabri-Tac does not get stringy like that. It gums up really well. I used to use tacky glue. I've used all sorts of different kinds of glues. My hot glue gun I still use, but I prefer to use Fabri-Tac because it tacks really well and really quickly, but I can still move it, and it adheres to a lot of different kinds of materials, including metal and wood and fabric and paper. So that's what I use. My sentiments, 3 of them came from a company called Illustrated Faith. They have a section called Print and Pray where you can pay relatively cheap for materials that you can use for art journaling that are printable. These words came from something called WordFetti. I'll link that in the description if you want to find it. So that's it for my project. I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you for joining me, and leave comments below.